It's your boy Luke, back again for another NFL Showdown video, this time for our Sunday Night Football matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the Minnesota Vikings, which happens to be on Halloween, so a little bit of a scary matchup we've got here. Some high-powered offenses, some high scoring going to be coming in our DFS contest as well, so makes for a little bit of an interesting slate. I also really like the pricing that Draftkings put out. A lot of the stud options on the slate are very easy to fit into your lineup. So not only are we going to have a high scoring affair, but also a very high scoring showdown slate. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to get you prepared for the single game slate, give you all the information you need to make your lineups, from an injury report to stud options to value plays, and of course our favorite captain selections. So without further delay, let's hop right into the picks for this week. First off with our injury report for this Sunday game slate. On the Cowboys side of things, we only have one major injury to really talk about, that being Dak Prescott, who's a game-time decision as of right now with a calf injury. Went through a little bit of the walkthrough here on Saturday, was not able to make a decision on whether he's able to play or not, so we will have to keep tabs on that tomorrow. A lot of the beat reporters, a lot of the people a little bit closer to the situation think that he is going to play, think that it might be a little bit of gamesmanship from the part of their coach, so I'm going to have him projected as is right now, but definitely something we want to keep an eye on for that tomorrow. And also for injuries, we have Tyron Smith is questionable, Dwayne Armstrong going to be out, but Michael Gallup, this is a little bit of an X factor here, could return from IR, also has not been rolled out for this game. He has until 4 hours before the game to be marked as active. So along with Dak Prescott, two names to keep an eye on there. On the Viking side of things, we have D.D. Westbrook as questionable, Patrick Jones out, Michael Pierce out, and Ben Ellefson out for them. So nothing major there, just a fourth string wide receiver in Westbrook as questionable. In terms of a game script here, in terms of an over-under, that kind of thing, we have a relatively high-scoring game like I alluded to before, a 51.5 point over-under, and a relatively close spread as well, with the Vikings just favored by 3 points. And with that spread there, I want to mention that actually bakes in Dak Prescott's injury, right? There's a lot of unknown behind it. It's still a 50-50 proposition. So it's more of a combination between what we would see with Dak Prescott out and what we would see with him in. With Dak Prescott at quarterback, I definitely think the Cowboys will be favorites here, probably by about 3 points. And I think that if he's out of the game, this would be closer to maybe a 10-point spread for the Vikings, right? There's a huge sway there. Obviously, their backup, not much experience to speak of at all. If he ends up being out, obviously would be a little bit of a different situation, but I definitely expect him to be playing. They would have rolled him out today if he had no chance of playing at all. With that being said, let's hop into some of our stud options for each team. And because I think this is going to be a closely contested game, I do think that it's going to be a relatively high-scoring game as well, just like Vegas thinks. I think we need to be targeting the passing offenses of these teams, particularly the stud options. So that's why we see Dak Prescott there as my number 3 stud option for the Cowboys. He's a little bit expensive, obviously, at $11,200. Also going to be garnering some ownership, but that's well warranted. The guy's been a borderline MVP candidate to this point, averaging over 300 yards per game. He's been very productive on the ground. He's actually had a few good rushes to this point of the year, which kind of surprised me, probably surprises a lot of you out there. You guys remember the injury that he had last year. A lot of people expected him to be a little bit more passive, and well, he's definitely had a less impact on the ground. He hasn't quite been as efficient as in the past. He's still mixed it in, which is nice. So over a 20-point projection there. I don't hate going to him at all. Just a little bit expensive. And number 2, somebody who's not quite as expensive. He's one of these stud options I alluded to that's easy to fit into your lineups. That being Amari Cooper at $7,000. Not going to be quite as popular either, but in terms of a point per dollar projection is excellent on this slate. A 17-point projection even, and at $7,000, that makes him one of the better plays on the entire slate. And at number 1, though, we have Ezekiel Elliott at $9,200, who is my favorite play on this slate, a lot of because the injury to Prescott, right? We know that they're going to try and protect that calf. They're not going to have him do as many bootlegs, so they're going to try and get the ball out of his hands quickly, whether that's for screen passes or whether that's just with the run game in general. So Elliott, somebody who typically gets close to 18, 19 touches a game. I think it's closer to 22, 23 just because of the injury situation there. So that puts him in a solid projection there at 18.8 points. Also not chalk. He's not somebody who's had the best year to this point, so not somebody who's going to be jammed into lineups quite like his counterpart on the other side, like a Dalvin Cook. So like him here, he's not my highest projected play on the slate, particularly from a point per dollar basis, is right around a 2.x kind of thing in terms of point per dollar. Amari Cooper's almost at a 2.5x, but still a solid option. and think he could do a whole lot worse. The thing that Elliott brings to the table that's better than Cooper, why he ends up at number 1 and not number 2, is the high-end ceiling. We know Elliott, if the Cowboys end up getting out to a big lead, could see a lot closer to 27 plus touches, maybe even 30 plus touches. So the ceiling is definitely there. For Cooper, that ceiling's closer to 20 points. So that's why you definitely see someone like Elliott in my captain's picks later on. He actually has that type of ceiling, whereas Cooper is more of a flex option just because he's more consistent. But now for the Vikings side of things, we have Kirk Cousins as our first pick there. You can see at $10,800, he's also quite expensive on the slate. But with all the scoring we expect from each side, it's definitely probably going to be a good idea to try and jam in these QBs. So even at high ownership, at an 18.5 point projection, that is more than enough to wind in the optimal lineup. At number 2, we have Adam Thielen, one of the pass catchers I expect to have a very big game here. At $8,400, just like Amari Cooper, he's somebody that you shouldn't have much trouble fitting into lineups at just 18.8% ownership and a 17.6 point projection. It's actually one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. Projects for well over 2x value. And Adam Thielen is somebody who has a very high ceiling. So maybe opposed to somebody like an Amari Cooper, Thielen has an immense amount of red zone upside. When this team gets into the red zone, Adam Thielen is the number 1 wide receiver on this team, has nearly a 40% target share, whereas outside of the red zone, it's opposite. Justin Jefferson is right around a 35% target share, with Thielen's down to 18%. So you like to see that for Showdown, especially where touchdowns matter so much. He's even somebody I'd consider deploying at the captain slot, which we'll get to here in just a little bit. And now for our number 1 stud option for this Vikings team, we have Dalvin Cook at $9,400, who is definitely going to be popular. You can see he's nearly 40% owned, but also has over a 20-point projection, the highest projection of any player on this slate. Actually have him projected for more points than Dak Prescott. A lot of that is due to his PPR upside. He's gotten plenty of targets out of the backfield this year, particularly from Kirk Cousins. So don't mind deploying them in the same lineup together. Definitely think that Cook could get a few receiving touchdowns. Also think that he has a relatively high floor. I mean, this guy's going to see 20 plus touches. He has in every game to this year where he's been healthy, and he's only $9,400. So just like a lot of these other stud options that we have, Dalvin Cook would typically be about $12,000 on any other slate. For whatever reason, Draftkings was a little bit softer with their pricing this time around. We're not going to complain because it puts them at a very good spot for our lineups. Now for our value plays. At number 3, we have Chris Herndon, who has been the backup tight end so far to Tyler Conklin on this Vikings team. But many people, including myself going into the year, expected that to change at some point. Chris Herndon's extremely athletic. He's an extremely high potential player who hasn't really lived up to the upside to this point of his career. He's been a very good receiving tight end. For the Jets, flashed plenty of upside despite having some of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. Now over here in the Vikings, he hasn't gotten much workload at all. I mean, Tyler Conklin was an offensive tackle to begin his career in college, obviously converted to tight end here in the pro ranks, and I'm surprised Herndon hasn't seen more production. So at just $600, he has been seeing red zone production, red zone snaps at the very least. He has a few catches in the red zone to this point, just hasn't cashed in for the touchdown yet. So if he ends up going out and doing that here on that slate, at $600, that is more than enough production to pay off. Also coming in with single-digit ownership in terms of the flex spot. So don't hate to see that at all. He's going to be low owned, going to be a low price player who's going to get at least a few snaps in this game. And number 2, somebody who has a much more consistent workload, that being Blake Jarwin at $2,000. Obviously quite a bit more expensive, 3 times the price right there. Also coming in with more ownership, but like I alluded to, definitely has a more consistent role in this game. Blake Jarwin plays about 60% of snaps for the Cowboys. They're one of the teams that loves to use 2 tight end sets, and that's why he ends up playing a lot for them. So at $2,000, you'd expect him to probably be an even better value play, but he's just the number 2 option at tight end. Unfortunately, Dalton Schultz is getting a lot more looks than Jarwin this year. Schultz has nearly 14 fantasy points per game, Jarwin at just over 7. But that could flip at any point. If the touchdown production ends up swaying Jarwin's way, that would make him an excellent play on the slate. Rather than putting up the 8.1 projected points that I have him for right now, with a touchdown, he could easily put up closer to 14 or even 15 fantasy points. So I like that kind of upside from Blake Jarwin. Again, at $2,000, it gives you plenty of flexibility as well. While he is a little bit touchdown dependent, we don't have a ton of value on this slate, which makes him somebody I'm definitely going to have in a few of my lineups. And at number 1, our best value play on the slate, and again, he's a little bit more expensive than I like to go to for value plays, but we don't have that many to go to on the slate. Obviously, you can mix in the kickers where you want to. Defense is not my favorite value play here just because of the high total that we have. KJ Osborne at $5,000 is an extremely high upside value play. Somebody who's not garnering as much ownership as he should. He's just 14.4% owned right now in my projections. I think he should be closer to 25, even 30%, and I would still have leverage on him. He's somebody who's a clear number 3 wide receiver for this team. He plays over 70% of snaps for the Vikings, and especially early on in the year, was getting plenty of targets going in this way. And this is somebody who's relatively new into the offense. He hasn't been a key cog in it, before this year or anything like that, and he immediately was getting the trust of Kirk Cousins. So it's not like he's going to be a stud option on this team. In fact, he's not playing all the snaps, like I said, but somebody who has deep play upside, has a few 80-yard touchdowns at the beginning of the year as well. And if he goes out there and has one of those big splash plays, can be an absolutely must-own option for the single game slate. And now for our captains, the real money-making options here. At number 3, we have Adam Thielen at $12,600. And again, I love his touchdown upside. Somebody who just is a red zone monster. Again, also not too of a prohibitive price tag. Just $12,600, single-digit ownership there, and a nearly 30-point projection at 26.4 points. So I think he's a relatively cheap option you can go to. He's not like one of those quarterbacks where you're spending nearly $18,000, and lets you build a more balanced lineup around it. And you guys will see with my captain options here, I'm not really going up to any of those super elite options just because I think there's so many options you want to fit into your lineups. I mean, so many of these studs are priced to a reasonable amount where if you take the right captain, you can fit all of them in. So definitely the type of build that I'm looking for. That's why you can see at number 2, we have Ezekiel Elliott at $13,800. You can see he's even a little bit higher owned, but still relatively low owned at just over 10%. Again, somebody I think that gets extra touches in this game due to the injury to Dak Prescott. Also somebody who's had a little bit of a downturn start to the year, so he's a little bit underrated. I mean, this guy was the number 1 fantasy player in the league for a few years, just a few years ago, and this O-line is still one of the best units in the NFL as well. So I think he still has a few ceiling games in him this year that we haven't quite seen to this point, so I definitely want to have him here for the single game slate. And at number 1, though, we have Dalvin Cook. Again, he was just an absolute steal at that price tag. And at $14,100 at the captain slot, that is going to remain true. And I expected him to come in with much higher ownership. A lot of people are trying to squeeze in those quarterbacks at captain. So that's why we see him there at just 15.2% ownership. That's a very good number in Dalvin Cook. And again, I have him as the highest projected player on the slate, higher than those quarterbacks. So I don't see a reason to spend that extra $4,000. You get somebody who's projected higher in my projections, coming in at lower ownership at the captain slot, and gives you more salary savings. So all we've got for our Sunday night football picks. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments who you've got as your favorite captain pick for the single game slate. Obviously for me, really like those 2 running backs. Definitely got to take Dalvin Cook if I got to choose though, but go ahead and let me know who you've got down in the comments. As always, I really appreciate all of your support here on the channel. If you guys haven't already liked the video, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, make sure you guys go ahead and do so. We're going to have a main slate live stream tomorrow morning at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, as we always do on the channel. And of course, more football content to come next week. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of that. And until tomorrow morning when we have that live stream, peace.